Civilized Society.
We're covering Jacob's Ladder. And Jacob's Ladder it's a movie from the 90s, and you might think, being a horror movie from the 90s, that, oh, this is not going to be what I'm looking for in a movie, that's going to be full of some of those very 90s tropes, you know? And it does have a few of those. But it's actually an ancient story, as the name, indicates, Jacob's Ladder. So looking into this movie, we're going to go through the story of Jacob's Ladder, the biblical story, which is one of the older and more mysterious of the biblical stories. I almost had to get a subscription to Christian.com or whatever to learn more about it, which, the patrons, that's what you support, is my subscription to ChristianBibleTools.com or whatever it is that I have to do to find out more about these really serious religious undertones to this movie. Not even undertones, they're kind of overtones. So Bible, we're going to go through the idea of demons, as always. Demons as kind of the symbolic manifestation of our trauma, our problems, our guilt. Dark Night of the Soul is something that you can look at this movie as depicting, and a lot of other different elements there, plus the whole war aspect and the anti-individual understanding that this movie places on war, which I think we disagree about the ending of this movie. And I think the ending of this movie is a great commentary on how war is the ultimate manifestation of anti-individualist ideology, if you will. That's my intro.
Great. Yeah, so we want the word of the podcast, right?
We do.
Everyone wants the word of the podcast. How popular do you think the word of the podcast is? Extremely popular.
We should poll it. We should bring it to a vote.
This is, you are like the democracy set up in South Vietnam in terms of legitimate democracy. It's not legitimate. All you do is use your social media following to make up fake polls and then bring your minions over and have them vote against me.
Their votes,
you understand?
The votes of minions are just as real as the votes of anyone else. And that's something also that Jacob's Ladder is a good way to understand.
Yes, Jacob's Ladder is a movie about voting rights. Okay, so the podcast, the word of the podcast, rather, is anhedonia. Anhedonia. Something I know a great deal about.
Jesus.
However, I did accidentally lose my place.
Anhedonia is the opposite of hedonism, essentially. In a way, not directly, but you can look at it as the opposite of hedonism because and both of those things feature into this movie, both hedonism and anhedonia.
Someone's trying to, I see, get into the way of the word of the podcast. Anhedonia, inability to feel pleasure, 1897, from French, anhedonia. They say it in the French way. I'm not going to do that, though. Coined 1896 by French psychologist Théodule Ribot as an opposite to analgesia, from Greek. An means not. Whatever. The point is you get the idea. It means you're not having a good time. The party isn't working for you. You can't experience any sort of pleasure. I experienced pleasure during the word of the podcast. Want everyone to know that. I think our viewers do too.
You. Okay, yeah.
Well, let's do a poll.
Yeah, let's do a poll.
Yeah.
Is that your whole thing, Anhedonia?
Well, I selected that word for this film because this depicts a Vietnam veteran, and one of the symptoms of depression and I believe post-traumatic stress disorder is anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure. And you see this in a particular scene where he's at the party, and again, whenever I see a horror movie depicting a party, I always feel a kinship because it's usually how I feel at parties also, So
screaming on the floor like
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that scene is actually really good because there's one part when he first starts to there's again all these there's parts of horror movies where the horror is almost indistinguishable from everyday life. That's how it starts. And you can call that foreshadowing, whatever, clues, but really it's the threshold on where life and horror intersect. And when he gets to the party, I think the first instance of life and horror starting to being overlapped like that is when he opens the fridge and there is I think a pig's head or some
goat
kind
head,
of
I would think.
Goat?
I think it's
Was it goat?
I would,
Yeah, that would
well,
be a little more
it's not
demonic.
a pig. Yeah, it has a goat-like aspect.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't look like a pig. It does have a something. I don't know. But yeah, the head of an animal, like the muscle though, it's like the stripped down to the tissue and kind of wrapped as if it's going to be served. But also, what kind of party serves the head of an animal? But also, it's in the fridge. It's wrapped in plastic. It seems like it's probably going to be cooked. So, but it startles him.
No, it should not. As soon as you see a skinned goat head in the refrigerator at a party, it is best to go ahead and just leave. Don't start trying to dance. Don't start trying to don't try to fit in. Don't try to feel like you need. This is important. I do a lot of public service announcements on this podcast, and I just want to tell you right now, if you're ever at a party and you find a goat head, I mean, there may be some parties where I don't know. Is it acceptable for there to be a goat head at some parties?
There are some parties, but they're not the kind that most people go to.
Yeah, I need to be more forthright about this.
Usually it's a religious party.
A religious party. So yeah, don't. If you find the goat head in the fridge, just say, I'm experiencing some anhedonia, guys. Sorry, gotta just invite me to the next one and walk out.
No one will know what that means anyway, so they'll let you go without questioning.
Yeah. I leave places all the time.
Unless they watch this podcast too, then they'll know.
That's true. I just don't tell people when I'm leaving places. I just leave.
Yeah, you do that, don't you?
I do that.
Yeah, I don't know if that's... you may not want to give that recommendation, because that's like kind of something that people do with social disorders.
It's a clean way to leave a place. Exit. You don't need to...
It's clean.
You don't need to be...
Not with the filth of these greetings.
All right. Well, especially in a time of a pandemic, you don't need to be shaking hands and
yeah, that's true. The pandemic has allowed for a lot of antisocial behavior that previously would have gotten you scorned. Now you can just say, I'm extra safe, whatever. Anyway, let's go back to the goat head. So the goat head is that perfect moment where horror and everyday life overlap, and there's a minute there where you can't distinguish, am I seeing something horrific, or is this just kind of the uglier parts of everyday life? But then he goes on, there's a weird crow in a cage, kind of horror, but also goth. Okay, maybe it's a goth party. This seemed a little bit like a goth party. And, but the first instance of true horror, which I love this part of the movie because it was so real in a way for anyone that's been at a party that they don't like, or if you've ever had like the bad trip and whatever, all that stuff. He's in the crowd with all the people dancing, and there's one lady that like he walks by her and her face is just slightly distorted, and she's like like laughing crazily in the crowd of dancers, and he's kind of just like don't like that person's face. And I don't know, I've been in that situation where you're in a crowd or a bar or something, and there's just a lot of people, and it's a lot of like chaos, and someone's face just looks wrong. That happens. And of course, this is the descent into when he starts to see true horror, and then he starts to, I guess, I don't know, hallucinate, or however it is that you characterize that. Because the weird thing with this movie is that everything is both real and not real. But anyway, let's go to the part of this, because I mean, the movie Jacob's Ladder, you got to talk about Jacob's Ladder. That was the first thing that I did in trying to understand this movie, was spend like over an hour learning about the biblical story of Jacob's Ladder and just Jacob in general.
And I'm going to actually, I didn't tell you beforehand, but I'm actually, once you finish talking about this, going to tell you how I actually don't think this has much to do with the biblical story whatsoever.
Oh, I think you're very wrong, but that's
Well,
interesting.
I know I'm very right.
Okay,
It has
I'll
something
just
to
go
do
into
with
a
the
long
biblical
spiel about the
No,
Bible. Then
no.
I'd be wrong.
Look, here's briefly before you begin, because it is important to understand the story of Jacob's Ladder, and also because it does have something to do with the film.
Yeah.
But the writer of this was actually really into Tibetan Buddhism, and so what I think that they're doing is he's using a lot of concepts from that, but he's encasing it in a Western tradition to make it understandable to a Western audience.
Well, that's interesting because Jacob's Ladder, I don't know the equivalent in Eastern religion, but it does have a role in Islam, in Judaism, and in Christianity. So, and really the idea of Jacob's Ladder, the actual ladder part, is just Jacob goes off into the desert, which is always where everybody has their realizations, and he falls asleep and has a dream, and he dreams of a ladder between heaven and earth where these angels are descending and beings are ascending and descending on it. And the interpretation of Jacob's ladder is pretty loose. There is no specific interpretation of it that's clear. Even Jacob, the figure himself in the Bible, is kind of a complex figure because his whole story comes about through what seems like a misdeed. He seems to trick his blind father into giving him the blessing that was going to go to his older brother, Esau. That's right. And so it's a weird thing for a biblical character that ends up being the patriarch of the Abrahamic religions, like afterwards, and kind of like the root of the tribes of Israel, to be kind of coming out of this misdeed. But there's, a lot of speculation there, and there's other things that he that's interesting. That it's a complicated figure, but I think the biggest connection between the movie and the biblical story is the dream. So the act of dreaming or having nightmares as some kind of a prophecy or a premonition, but also the idea of just duality. And duality is a concept that is basically in every religion. Every belief has that distinction between whether it's heaven and earth, life and death, or some kind of like good and evil. That duality of the world is a common theme. So I think that's also something that's in this movie, because he is essentially between life and death, between heaven and hell. There's the angel that's supposed to be the chiropractor angel, which I think is a weird thing to make an angel be a chiropractor. I don't know. It's kind of sometimes I was like, you know what? The Bible did a good job. Okay, the Bible didn't like try to be like, here's an angel, he's a chiropractor. Like, it just seems kind of mundane.
But see, I thought about this a lot, and that's
Yeah?
why, well, I didn't think about it a lot, but I thought about it a little bit. So I'm just going to speculate wildly about this. This is where the Buddhism thing comes in, because I didn't understand why he was a chiropractor either, but I think that is there not the idea of actual physical alignment in your body in terms of being helpful towards actual enlightenment? So I don't know. That was one theory of mine on why he's a chiropractor.
Isn't that a Hindu, like kind of the Hindu idea of the chakras, where you have like the
right,
and you're trying to kind of balance all those, I don't know, different centers of the body.
Yes, which is not Buddhism. Hinduism is not Buddhism. We know that.
Yeah, it is Eastern though, so that's.
This gets complicated, and it goes beyond my understanding of Buddhism, which is very limited. But so you talk about this in terms of a place between heaven and hell, and there's a word for this called the Bardo, Bardot, which I almost made the word of the podcast, but I did not. So this is the kind of nether world between when you're on the edge of dying or you already have died and your consciousness is still existing. And so the writer of this was really into Tibetan Buddhism. He went to Tibet, I believe, and spent time in a monastery. And so what I actually see this more as, because I read about it, was that that there is this Tibetan Book of the Dead thing going on in the film the whole time. That this is, and as we see, spoiler alert, close your ears if you haven't watched it yet, he's dead.
Yeah.
Probably.
Well,
most likely.
He's not dead, though.
He's dying.
Thing. Yeah, exactly. So there's kind of that, and it makes sense that there's this struggle, it seems, between life and death, which is that space, that bardo, where you're between realms. And I don't know, I think the idea of Jacob's ladder it's an interesting, I mean, it really is. I tried to look into it a lot, and I thought I would just find a simple, it would be, oh, it's this, but it's really not straightforward at all how it's interpreted. It seems to be the best way to understand it. I mean, the idea of ladder isn't even the correct translation from the original Hebrew. It's translated as ramp. So it's not this kind of ladder that you climb. It's a pathway. And so that actually makes more sense to the idea of there being this middle way between worlds. So I mean, that's ultimately one of the large themes of this movie is being in this middle place. Now, there is the scene I thought it was interesting because I didn't catch that, and then you had caught that the speak where how he speaks so much about being really cold, and that coldness is actually, what did you say? It's
hell is depicted. We think of hell as a hot place, but actually in the Inferno from Dante, the poem, you may have heard of it. It's at the very center of hell is Satan, and he's freezing cold. And so when I saw that when he's it's a scary scene.
Yeah, it is very scary.
If anybody's ever I've had some high fevers, clearly, and. Yeah, so my thought was that is referencing the whole movie is I feel like his soul going towards heaven and towards hell and being in this, and that's where the Western idea of heaven and hell makes sense. It's not, I don't think that's really exactly a literal Buddhist idea, but yeah, so I thought that the coldness was actually, but it's odd because, he's experiencing freezing cold. But they're saying you have a fever. Oh, your temperature is so high. They're seeing it as he's extremely hot. That's why they're throwing him in the bathtub. But he says I'm very cold before he gets thrown into the bathtub in the ice.
Yeah.
So there's that.
That is how a fever is, though, right? I mean, you don't actually feel hot. You feel cold.
No.
Really?
I don't know. Maybe that does occur sometimes too, but
because I thought you get chills. I don't know.
Well, do you speak for the American Medical Association?
No, but I could speak as someone that's had a fever. But I don't remember when I've had I haven't had a fever since I was young, so I don't remember. But I mean, I do know you get cold when you're sick. But either way, yeah, he's saying he's cold in different parts of the film too. Like when he's in the that scene where he's back home with his wife, and the interesting eerie part. I watched the movie again after you had pointed that out, that the idea of cold being something you feel in hell. When he's in that scene with his wife, and he's like, "Oh, close the window. It's so cold." Then the child comes in. And the child is the one that died. And this child says, "It's very cold in here." And I was like, oh, he's dead too. It makes it different when you know that. Because otherwise, it's just like, what's wrong with these people? Close the window and shut up already. But that makes it more horrific. Because the kid's dead also.
Yeah. And here's another thing, man. I'm really surprising you with several points here that I did not add to the notes. So I apologize for that if it throws you off track. But here's the thing. There's some problems, and I know we don't like to go into the specifics of films a lot of times. We like to kind of leave that, but my problem was, it's not a problem. It's just that I started to think maybe this this family that he has is part of the imagination, part of the demons in a sense, even though they're positive, but part of the attachments that he has that never actually occurred. Because very briefly, here's something I don't understand. The very first scene, you're in Vietnam. It says 1971, Mekong Delta. Mekong Delta is in the south of Vietnam, by the way, very far south, right? Some other part in the movie, he says, I could swear it, and people can check this out. I could be wrong. He says, I was in Da Nang. But
Yeah,
Da Nang is way up north. That's near Hue, which is like with the northern part of the border of South Vietnam, that state that existed. Those are two different places. And so what I don't understand is, but he's also supposedly a professor. And not just a professor. Like they say reference, it took you 5 years to get a PhD.
Yeah.
So here's the thing I don't understand, the timeline part. 1971. Let's say he goes to war in 1971. All right. And maybe if he's already, number one, if he's in college, he wouldn't have to be drafted or go. But some people would have volunteered. What I don't understand is if he comes back in 1971, how you go to college for 4 years, have a 5-year PhD program there also, and then have 3 children, all of which seem to be relatively, like, I don't know how old they are.
Under 10,
understand.
under 12.
Yeah, somewhere around there. I don't understand how that all could occur within the timeline of this film and really make sense. So is it possible that his entire that maybe he never actually had that family? I just don't understand the timeline of it exactly.
Well,
I don't understand what's possible because I'm not sure when this movie's supposed to be set either. Like, is this supposed to be in 1990 when the film was made, roughly, or was this supposed to be?
How he was in Vietnam? How would he be set in 1990 if there's a scene of him being in Vietnam?
Well, because this is later. Things occur later, obviously, right? He's 71.
He says it's 6 years after he had seen his. One of the fat guy, the one that survived the attack or whatever, the whole thing. That guy, when that guy calls him, he says it's been 5 or 6 years, I think. So there's that. So he had that. It tells you there he's been already back for 5 or 6 years from that.
Okay, so in theory, he went to college and then out of college, he went to Vietnam in 71. He left.
I think the family is maybe afterwards though.
Right. So then he comes back home, gets married, has kids, and all within 5 years. It didn't add up to me.
But here's the thing. He dies in Vietnam.
Correct. So none of that. All that would have had to have happened. He would have had to. That's what I'm trying to get at. He would have had to have been a professor, already had a family with a 12-year-old kid, and then signed up to go to Vietnam, So in a way, I started to think of it as like, and of course, all this is left very unclear, and they do a reasonably good job of. The last scene bothers me a little bit, because there's this idea that you're not supposed to do in writing. It's kind of like if you write something, you say, "Oh, but it was all just a dream."
Yeah, I get it.
There's a little bit of that, but it's fine, and it works.
I have a reason for why I actually, when that part happened, at first I was like. But then I stopped and I realized this actually does add to the movie, the overall ideas that the movie is grappling with. But we'll talk about that part later. So, I mean, okay. Yeah. Here's the thing that's interesting, though, is that, so throughout set all that aside, because that's more, I don't like to get into the very gritty details of the movie because I was looking up some stuff about the movie and there's a goof in the movie where the chiropractor runs into the hospital and he says Jacob Stinger and he gets the name wrong and I'm just like I don't care, and then also the book, when he's looking at all the demonology books, one of the books that they showed, the Witch's Bible or whatever, something like that, that book hadn't even come out yet when it's that year that they're showing the book, so technically that book didn't exist. And I was like, I don't care. Unless it's very integral to the story to the point that it's like, well, this just is not, it's not truthful anymore. Those type of little
this
details,
is integral though. No, those details I agree with you.
That is.
Because we're trying to figure out if any of that imagined life, because he has two imagined lives. Yeah, he has the family and the children, the stable home environment, all that, and then he has whatever her name is, I forget.
Jezebel.
is that really her name?
Yeah, that's her name. Yeah.
Right. They really go heavy on that.
They went hard with the biblical figures. Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, we'll leave that aside. I just wanted to point it out because it's unclear to me what is true and what isn't true. And that's the point of this movie in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And it's fine. But
there's something interesting about that, though, that there's this, the movie goes back and forth between this thing of, is this real or is this a dream? Is this a nightmare? Are you really seeing that? Or is he hallucinating? Is this on purpose? Is this an accident? Is this coincidence? Is this, something intentional? There's all this questioning of reality and what one can perceive as real or not. And so I think this is that's kind of one of the central parts of the movie, though, is this theme of not being able to trust material reality or your own rationality. And so that goes now to the idea, so we'll skip around because I want to talk about the demons aspect, and I want to talk a little bit more about some of the parallels between the Bible, the biblical story. But the nightmares and the dreams in this movie are as an important thing is really interesting, because there is. So the idea of the dark night of the soul, it comes from a poem written by a 16th century Spanish mystic and poet Saint John of the Cross, and it's just, I think it's just called the Dark Night or Dark Night of the Soul, and it's kind of been taken out and used to mean different things, especially like in New Age stuff and a little bit like in the Jungian circles or whatever, but it's kind of misunderstood. It's not exactly this moment of, it's not rock bottom. It doesn't mean rock bottom. It is actually, but the thing is that it often occurs because of rock bottom. The dark night of the soul is when you cannot pass any further using only rational intellect and material reality. And this is why this was a Spanish mystic, a Christian mystic that wrote this, because it's the idea that when you let go of certain material reality and your own rationality, you're able to reach a different understanding that lies beyond that. And so he loses his son and his family, and he's basically at this kind of like, having everything taken from him that is material and that is rational. He can't make sense of what's going on, and his material reality is not to be trusted. And so this is the scene that made me think about this, was when he goes to his old home where he had his family, and he just kind of sits there and it's dark, and he makes peace with letting go of all his memories and all his attachments, and that's when the boy that's dead shows up and is like, let's go. And shortly after, that's when you realize that he's dead, and he dies after that.
It's a weird thing, though, briefly. While you're talking about that, I just realized something. And I don't want to. You're right. There is a lot of Christian or Jewish symbolism, Judeo-Christian symbolism, and it just occurred to me when he goes up to that house, which ostensibly was his old house. It's like the idea of St. Peter at the gate. Like there's a doorman there who's like welcoming him back and lets him in, I think. So there is, I just realized there is that little nod to that idea of, isn't it St. Peter? Isn't he the one that's up there?
I think it's
out?
Peter. Is that is
Paul?
like lets people in?
Peter
Is
or
it
Paul?
Paul?
It's Peter, I think.
Now I don't. Now I can't. Yeah, I don't know. Now I can't tell. Well, we're not experts on the Bible. That's not. Somehow. It really is. The more I try to do the analysis of these movies like this, I realize how crippling it is not to know the Bible that much, because it really is like the first like deepest and most comprehensive attempt at storytelling that encapsulates human experience and wisdom into it. It's
and
like,
horror films really use, I mean, everything in the Western
yeah.
literary tradition until fairly recently use the Bible as a basis in a lot of ways. So just if any new viewers are watching this, we are not a pseudo Christian outreach podcast, just so I understand that. But it is important to understand that these stories are the basis of a lot of Western literature, and especially in horror. I mean, it's used a lot, and we've said before the Bible has a lot of horror stories in it, which makes sense because, you know, to some degree these are stories about human beings living,
suffering,
life,
dying,
you know.
all this.
So
yeah, and evil. I mean, the Bible is one of the most comprehensive original analysis of evil. So of course it's going to have horror in it, and of course horror would take from it. But anyway, so I mean, the idea here is that and this is again that kind of realm between realms, the unconscious, the dark. This is where you let go of rationality, of material reality, and that is what allows you to grapple with something beyond that. And it's and then of course he ascends the staircase in that scene after he lets go of trying to rationalize things and of trying to hang on and all of that. So there's something interesting there in that idea. I mean, I think there's something to gain from it's a kind of a really hard to understand concept, this idea of letting go of rationality and material reality, because then especially us today in our modern secular world, we say, well, what else is there then? If I can't use my intellect and I can't look at the material world to understand anything, what else is there? And that's when you're in the dark. That's when you're in the realm between realms. And I don't know. I can't tell people what they're going to find in the realm between realms. But for a very, very, very long time, people have been finding things beyond rationality and beyond the material realm. It's almost like human beings have this innate inclination to search for something beyond just the material world and just what their mind can grasp. You know, a lot of the Christian mystics believed there was a school of Christian mysticism that turned away from the more reasoned approach, which is like Aquinas and like these kind of more studious theory-based approaches to religion. And then there's the more mystical, poetic version of that school of thought, which is kind of this idea that, and you hear this said for religion, that it is simply what you don't know, that there is that God is the unknowable and the unknown. And
but they reference that very directly in the film. I mean,
yes,
you know, okay, I didn't want to jump over you, but
no, I was going to say this.
Okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, because I'm not sure what you're going to.
Well, the chiropractor angel quotes Meister Eckhart.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Which is like a Christian mystic that regained popularity over the last 100 years or so. So, you know, it's right there in the movie.
Yeah, and so this, like, let's take it back to the demons now, because that idea of the chiropractor / angel keeps telling Jacob to relax. Every time he's with him and he's working on him, he tells him relax before he does a move on him.
Which is gross. I think chiropractic is gross. Number one, I don't like it. I'm not sure that it's real. It could be pseudoscience. I mean, look, all right, now I'm going to make a claim about chiropractic. I make claims all the time on this podcast. Everyone knows. But if you look in the history of chiropractic, there's going to be a lot of angry chiropractors. All right, so some I actually know some people say it works fine. Yeah. It may work, but it is a little pseudoscientific itself.
It's kind of like acupuncture, you know, where it's like people say it works, but
acupuncture
you can't really
at least
prove.
Yeah,
you're more supportive of acupuncture.
Well, it has a longer history. I'll at least give acupuncture that.
Yeah, so does like Chinese folk medicine of like, you know,
sure,
murdering bears for their bladders or whatever.
True,
so,
and not
you know, we've denounced the shark fin soup already.
We
so
have.
You can't walk it back now.
I'm not, but I mean, I endorse acupuncture over shark fin soup. I'm just saying that, like, I don't do acupuncture and I don't do chiropractic. All I do is drink pure rainwater. That keeps me healthy. but here's the thing. Okay, so forget about chiropractors. Don't send me angry messages. Forget about that. I do want to say one other thing about it, though, is he not only tells them to relax all the time. You notice he says turn to your right, and then he goes the wrong way, and he goes your other right. Yeah. And I saw that as another reference to this idea of the left, which I think we may have done this as a word of the podcast. The left is in Latin sinister. Yes. I'm not saying it in the Latin way, but the left and the left-hand path, we have talked about this, is in esotericism.
Dark magic.
More, I don't know. That's a little harsh. I mean, I'm not sure if it's always dark magic. It is the way that is not proven, the way that is a little more unexplored, and I guess sometimes it can be considered dark magic. So I thought, they're clearly doing that for some reason. The writer is referencing that for some reason because it happens twice.
Also, it's, now that I think about it, there's something important in his character being a professor, and there's kind of this whole thing that, and the chiropractor says, for a professor, you don't know your right from your left, and he's like, you haven't read Meister Eckhart, he kind of keeps pushing on this, how are you a professor and you're so like out of touch in a way and oblivious in some ways. And that kind of goes back to this idea that rationality doesn't solve all problems, that rationality in some places can be an obstacle. And that makes sense for this idea that he can't tell his right from his left, even though he's this like PhD.
True. There is that. Just the idea of the professors not paying attention or whatever. So
yeah,
maybe I read too far into that one.
No, I think they're both. I think it's both. I think it could be both. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so to finish up with the demon stuff, I love demon stuff. I'm really into it. Like, there's just so much. It's such an old and rich mythology that is so vivid in the way it approaches the human experience. And I mean, so okay, let's go to Jacob, because there's this famous story of Jacob wrestling with an angel, and there's a great beautiful painting of it too that I don't know what it's called, but I
think it's called The Wrestling Match.
Yeah, that's what it says in
By
the Bible.
Rembrandt.
In the Bible. Yeah. No one knows what it is. It's a very mysterious story because Jacob comes back from sending his wives, which is another like Jacob, moment in the Bible. Because you're not supposed to have two wives in the Bible, but there's debate about why he did this and whatever.
Are you sure that's?
Yeah, it's a problem.
Wait, where does it say that?
Where does it say what? That
you're not allowed to have more than one wife. Isn't that later?
I mean, I don't know. I can't quote you. That's the justification for Jacob is that, well, that rule was made later.
Is that a Ten Commandment thing?
No. It's not a.
We're showing our ignorance here of the. But I mean,
but Ten Commandments.
Well, no, but no one knows the Ten Commandments. I bet no one.
I know the 10 Commandments.
No, you do not. Tell me all 10 right now.
Thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not adulterize.
Sure.
Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not worship false idols. Thou shalt not covet something. I'm not sure what it is. It may just be covet. I'm not sure what you're not supposed to covet. I feel like it's your neighbor's wife, but that might be just a specific instance. Thou shalt. Then now we're getting into the ones that are a little more. We don't really pay attention to these, where it's like sacrifice only things on Wednesday or whatever.
No,
okay,
I don't think
I can't remember the other ones.
Yeah,
what are
6.
What are they?
I don't know them either. No, I agree. Like I bet. I don't need to know about that, but I bet one of them may be. I was wondering, is one of them don't take more than one wife, and I'm not sure if that's true. But anyway, Jacob was before Moses. So Moses hadn't even brought the 10 Commandments down, so Jacob could have however many wives he wanted. I'm pretty sure that like just having a bunch of wives was pretty standard back in the ancient Middle East for people that had material wealth. I am not a Mormon, by the way. I just want to You know?
Here's the 10 Commandments. 1, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, basically don't have false
That's
idols.
the most important one you forgot. Don't have other gods before me.
I said don't have false idols. Okay, I said
that's different.
No, that's
okay, keep on reading.
version.
You'll see. Keep on reading.
Number 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. All right. That's true.
Yeah,
You should.
those are two different things.
Of course, I missed the one that's like, don't worship other things. So I'm like, Bible, but you're also kind of like, it's the same for other religions too, right? God wouldn't like that one. Say, don't have false idols, don't worship other gods. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain.
We definitely have been violating that multiple times per podcast.
Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother.
Forgot that one.
Mom and Dad will not be happy about that. Send me to Bible school and this is to come out with missing that one. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Yeah. And you shall not covet your neighbor's house or your neighbor's wife. I was right. I wasn't being weird. Nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. Leave your neighbor the fuck alone. God was a libertarian.
Okay, so now everyone's been made aware.
Up to speed on the 10 Commandments.
Yeah, brought up to speed. So it doesn't have anything to do with wives.
This is not a covert outreach program.
It's starting to seem like it. I know. It's like we're like those, the Christians that are like they want to be cool and they're like I come out, with like a guitar playing
hair and whatever.
Christian music, Christian rock, and everyone's
Christian metal or whatever. Yeah,
that's great.
Oh,
it's not that. It's not that.
No, I mean we seem like pagan heathens anyway with our secret society. I'm pretty sure God did not want you to have secret society, so we're already like on.
Doesn't say that. You just
not
read
in
the 10 Commandments,
but the whole Bible is full of other rules. So anyway, okay, look.
I don't know why did I just make that noise. Why did I just go? I just did some weird noise and fluttered my hands.
What is cursing
that?
You?
He is. I felt like the Hereditary girl for a second.
That's pretty fucking.
Yeah, that's
better
not good.
Stop bearing some
Yeah,
faultlessness or whatever we're doing here. Like, God, sorry. There's like a bird outside, like making strange gestures at me too. So God knows what's going on. All right. We've gone too far. Anyway, let's get back to the biblical stories. Okay, God. So the thing about Jacob wrestling with the angels is a really interesting story because that's in a way what the whole movie is. Jacob, the movie character, wrestling with life and death, wrestling with God, wrestling against these demons and angels. And so that's what the chiropractor ultimately tells him is stop holding on. Stop fighting against things. And then the things that you're fighting that you think are demons actually become angels trying to release you, which I find to be a difficult premise. That's the Buddhist idea. That's not Christian at all.
Exactly. And you can say that is leave your attachments. Look, again, I'm not an expert on Buddhism. I read, and I read widely, and I speculate. But Buddhism is not something I know the details of a lot. I do know that Tibetan Buddhism is a very specific form of Buddhism, and it is considered the more mystical or esoterical type. I think there's like big boat Buddhism, little boat Buddhism, and then Tibetan Buddhism is almost its own thing. And that's obviously, I think it's a Western division of Buddhism into three very broad categories. Buddhism, like all religions, is going to take on local elements in the culture it's in. Regardless, clearly we're not Bible exports. I'm clearly not a Bible export.
Your tongue has been cursed.
I know. I'm not a Bible export or a Buddhist export. I'm made in America.
Oh my God.
Okay. So anyway, yeah.
Okay, the idea of fighting. Yeah, so that's the thing. And like maybe that's why it's interesting that that's the thing that gives me pause is this idea of why are you trying to stay alive? Just stop and die and then you'll be fine. I was like, I don't like that. That's not the ending I want. How does he stay alive? But that would make sense that it's this because that's one of the unique elements of a lot of Eastern religion and belief is that there's so much more room given to life after death as a concept, as something that one can consider. Religion in the West, for the most part, I mean, there is obviously a lot of still consideration for that, but the focus is a little more on the life that you are living and living that in accordance with your God's principles and being worthy of what comes afterwards. But there's kind of this element that like, don't worry yourself too much about what God's going to do with you afterwards, you know? Whereas a lot of Eastern religion has so much more to say on that. And so I think,
well, and we always talk about Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. Well, we don't really talk about Schopenhauer because he's hard to read.
Yeah, he is hard, but he is the predecessor to Nietzsche and kind of like I think he's like one of the first major bridges between the West and Eastern philosophy because he was super into it. Yeah,
and one of Nietzsche's criticism of the Schopenhauerian view is that he did not like, and Nietzsche wasn't reading this, I think, exactly correctly, I don't want to say that. Nietzsche was, okay, so in his idea of what Buddhism was, which may not have been correct or complete, he did not like this idea of the renunciation of the world. He thought that the Eastern religions and Buddhism, that Schopenhauer kind of slightly seemed to endorse that idea. And then Nietzsche also saw within Christianity a non-life giving force, a renunciation of life, but in a different way. He was against both those things. And I think that is, but to your point, us being Westerners, there's something we don't like about that idea of, oh, just let it go, you'll be reborn, all that kind of stuff. We're like, no, fight the demons. Or I do anyway. That's the same way I felt. I was like, no, you gotta fight, fight the demons.
I wonder if there's an element of the newness of the Western world. And because, I mean, compared to the Eastern world and Eastern philosophy, the West is younger. And then also the Eastern world has always had a little bit more of a collectivist culture. I think part of that is just not in the way that it's really understood popularly, but I think more collectivist in the sense of you are one of a long line. When a culture has such a long history, it almost by just the sheer significance of its long existence diminishes the individual a little bit. It's like, how can you be so grandiose when you're just a blip out of so many ancestors that have come before you, especially, and then you can compare that to like a country like the United States where you can't even track your ancestors very far without leaving the country.
We're really speculating wildly today, and I'm for it. Here's what I'll also say, and I'm just making things up as I go. But it's based in some knowledge. So if you think about that, Western can mean a lot of things and Eastern can mean a lot of things. But in Christianity, there is a time, has a beginning and it has an end. So it is finite in that sense. Like there is a beginning of the world, it's in Genesis, and there is an end of the world.
That's right.
But in Buddhism, that is not how it is, and I don't think in Hinduism either. There's circular time is more of the idea.
Yeah.
So within a framework, if your framework is that everything is essentially circular and infinite, that would do something, I would think, to the psychology and the place of the individual even more so than in the West, where there's this linear time. There's this, it's easier to have a place in a universe where there's a beginning and an end, whereas in the Eastern tradition, I don't think you have that. So
it's an interesting thing there.
Speculating on Buddhism. That's what this is all about.
Well, I mean, it is interesting to understand why it strikes you differently, because I have the same thing. When the angel told him, stop fighting, I was like, that doesn't make any damn sense. What are you saying? To just die and then it's not a problem anymore? And that is where there's a immediate divorce from the biblical analysis that you can apply, because that's just, I mean, granted though, he does use a quote from Meister Eckhart, which was a Christian mystic. So, even then there is that it wasn't from, but you did say that he is maybe couching his Eastern, the Tibetan Buddhism in Western rhetoric, so maybe that's why. But
yeah, that's where it gets mixed up. I mean, it's not. I don't want to say it's mixed up. In a way, I feel like this would have been a good novel. And I read something where the screenwriter said, I think some of his first versions, he's like, this is kind of hard to make into a movie and hard to sell because there's so many elements to it that almost would work in a novel format better. To be fair, they really did. I mean, it was supposed to be longer too. There was 20 to 30 minutes of the film that was cut out because they did like audience testing, which I don't like that, I don't think. And then they ended up cutting out several different scenes. They cut out a scene where Jezebel like reveals her form. They cut out a scene where he thinks that he's free of the demons, but then he realizes that he's not. And they cut out some other scenes too. I think one with, who was Michael? Michael was the angel, right? In the movie, or you mean?
Yeah, in the angel. I mean, in the movie.
There's the archangel Michael, but I don't remember who's Michael.
What's the name of the chiropractor?
Good.
I don't remember his name. I thought it was Michael.
Could be. I mean, that would be.
No, it's Louis. It's Louis.
Yeah. No, well,
who is Michael?
Is he the fat guy that gets blown up in his car?
That might be it.
Oh, we don't know.
Ah, man, I can't remember the names. But one of the scenes was Jacob walks in somewhere and finds Michael, whoever Michael is, decapitated. So there was a lot more. Yeah, there was a lot more in the film that got cut out. So, which I think, is a bummer. Let it rip. If you're going to do a horror, just do it up. I don't care what the audiences say. I am the audience. Ask me first. Not these fools that were like, it's kind of, apparently the criticism the movie got from the test audiences was that it was overwhelming, which makes sense for the idea that there was like, the whoever it was that you were saying, the director or something, saying that it's too much, that it could have been better as a novel. Apparently it was overwhelming.
And so, like, this is a movie I watched a long time ago as a kid, and I hadn't watched it since. And I just watched it 2 days ago. And but in my mind, I knew that the film had scared me a lot when I was a kid. I watched a lot of horror movies as a kid. And, this... a brief interlude besides our speculation about the Ten Commandments and the differences between the Eastern and Western world. That scene in where he's taken down the hospital is extraordinarily gory, and it is that. So some of those scenes, but that one was disturbing, but that one's just full on.
That was the most horrific part. That was it. Like, that was the pinnacle of horror in that movie.
It was, in terms of just gore and that, and it maybe and arguably was, but the things that scared me, and I remember when I was younger, and also when I watched it recently, was it's this, and so then we get this element of they're playing with so many different things. The element of was he dosed with a hardcore psychedelic that is causing him to have these flashbacks, essentially, because you see. So some of the more disturbing things to me were the subtle things. Like actually the scariest one in the whole movie to me was when the nurse leans over and you just very quickly see this grotesque horn coming off of her head. That was actually, and you see that also on the subway train, the tentacle coming off that person,
whatever.
And so I can see, I understand why I remembered it as being a horror movie that I wanted to talk about in this whole kind of broader thing we're doing with the Vietnam War as a backdrop. But we should, I suppose, talk briefly about that idea of...
No, the war?
Not the war so much, but the psychedelic component.
Okay, let me finish with the demon stuff really
quick.
What you said, though, about the horror. So we've gotten onto this subject, and I wrote this in the note. Now, okay, well, here's one thing. First of all, also, Jacob has two wives as a biblical character, and he kind of has two wives in the movie. He has the wife that he really loves, Rachel, in the Bible. This is in the Bible. Rachel is the one that biblical Jacob wants to marry, but for some reason, she and her father trick Jacob into marrying the older sister, Leah. And then he's forced to work for 7 more years, because he worked for the father for 7 years to earn the right to marry Rachel. And then he worked 7 more years to earn the right to actually marry Rachel instead of being tricked into marrying Leah. And in the movie Jacob has 2 wives. If you know, I don't think Jezebel is his wife, but still, it's close enough. And one he actually loves, and then one who he's just with her. And there's like, I think that there's this, so there's elements here that are, you know, that go into the biblical story still, but there's also you know, to finish up with the unknown idea and all that, is the idea of the distinction between holy and hellish, or awesome and awful. And we've spoken about that before, how there's almost this fine line between something that's awful, like horror, and then amazing. And I think it's Jordan Peterson that I have seen speak about that you get the same reaction from terror as you do from awe. And I think that he's likened it to when a cat is afraid, their fur stands up, and it's a similar thing to when a human being gets like their goosebumps and your hair stands up on end. And but that's also a reaction of both awe and of fear. And I think that this movie is a really, there's this duality where there's the unknown as God and as death, and then also the known world that he's dealing with. I don't know, what do you think about that? This distinction between awful and awesome as something in this movie.
No, I know the reference you're talking about. I mean, the word awesome has just become
it's
slang
not what it was.
or whatever, you know, but it meant it's and the word terrible also. So so in the Bible, you know, you often hear God referred to as terrible, but they don't mean terrible like he's
mighty.
They
right?
mean, yeah, it's like looking at the ocean or looking at something that's so
or like off a
vast.
cliff.
Yeah, something that's vast that it gives you that feeling. I think that's probably where most people will get that feeling, is by looking at the natural world and seeing something that's just the scope of which is so big that it's overwhelming. Or looking at the night sky, you know, and a clear night with all the stars. There's something. It's not bad, but it's so overwhelming that it's not good either. So
I wonder.
That's awesome. Stars are awesome. Astronomy is awesome. Am I right?
It's funny to say it. I wonder. Okay, 2 things. Yes, that's right. The idea of, you know, the ocean and vastness being what causes that reaction of awe that's almost awful. That it makes you feel in the same way. I mean, and that's the idea that you tremble before God, you know, because it's not that God is a monster. It's that God is such a figure of vastness, of what is beyond human comprehension, that this is a religious podcast. I don't know how this.
I mean, it's Jacob's Ladder.
It's awesome.
God is awesome. Then I come out playing the electric guitar and
playing Stairway to Heaven or something.
Yeah. No, not Stairway to Heaven. It would be really bad Christian rocks.
I mean, if you're gonna do it right, okay, this podcast is still good. We can still be covert, you know, outreach program and not be bad. We could be the first one because we're actually not. Whatever. Here's the thing.
If this podcast doesn't work, then we'll just switch it up. We'll pretend to be
ministering.
Christians and start being a ministry. We'll get more donations.
Yeah, for real.
But of course, look, here's the thing. It's a movie called Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah,
you gotta talk about God. We can't, you know, we can still be secularists or whatever, humanists or, you know, you don't gotta believe in this.
Or atheists, whatever.
Whatever you want to do.
I mean, atheist still looks at a mountain, I hope, and says, wow, I feel amazing. I feel, inspired. And I think that...
They don't.
Now,
Atheists just look at mountains and they measure it and they're like, that's science. And
Sam Harris. That's the Sam Harris approach. No, I'm starting a feud with Sam Harris for no reason.
I don't know why.
I just like to. It's funny to me. Anyway, I wonder if, and here's actually to keep on my feud with Sam Harris.
Actually, he would probably know more about Buddhism and could tell us that we're idiots about how we're talking about Buddhism.
Come on the podcast. Tell us why we are idiots. But the thing is, and I mean, there is, of course, he's not an asshole. Like, he knows things, of course.
He's not an asshole. Great.
It's fine. I totally think that I respect him, all that. And there is, his expertise in being, this kind of mindfulness and his background in neuroscience is a really interesting one, because you're getting the side of where you ask the questions and you see the mystical things, but then you actually have the answers for those things. But what I wonder is if, and this is a big argument, is if if the growth of science as an answer for everything reduces how often we can feel awe over what is unknown. Because the more what is unknown and what induces that sense of this is beyond what I can explain shrinks because it becomes explainable, do our chances for that sense of awe that we seem wired to be able to feel, do they reduce? And I know that the rebuttal is that, well, just because you know how a sunset works doesn't mean that you don't find the beauty in the sunset. Maybe, but that also kind of sounds like a thing that you just say, but you don't actually really know if that's true or not. I mean,
that's right. I do. I think it's because looking at a sunset, I understand that idea, could produce what people think of awe, but that's missing that terrible component to it. Because I actually don't think, no matter how realistic you are, or an atheist or rationalist or whatever, that there are probably certain things that can happen or that you can experience that induces a sense of awe regardless of how you can explain it.
Yeah.
But...
And I think that those things are things that we remember really well. I think childbirth comes to mind. When people have their child, that seems to rely... There's very few people that are like, I know how it works, so it doesn't really, it's not really interesting to me. And it's interesting because what makes that different then? Because it's not childbirth in general. It's not that most people are just like, childbirth in and of itself is so mystical. No, it's your child's birth that induces that sense of awe. There's something very interesting in that. I wonder if it's the experience itself. It's that you're creating life. Like, there's something about being in the experience that makes it more awe-inducing than just the idea of it, because the idea of it is what we have the science to explain now. Now childbirth is very easily explained. It's very mundane. Pretty much everyone knows how it works. Not in the details, but we get the general concept. But your child's birth is different because it's not. It transcends just the biology and the explanation. That's not what makes it interesting. It's that it's your child, and I wonder. I don't know. I can't speak to it. I don't know. It's not happened to me. But I wonder how that is the difference. And I do think that there maybe is something important in our ability to experience awe in the truest sense, not in the sense of I look at the sunset and it's beautiful. That's not the same. And really, if I had to think of it for myself, it's very, I can't remember the last time I felt something like that. And I mean, I've seen the sunset. I've watched the sunset, set over the entire city. I can go out and watch the sunset tonight, and I have this beautiful view that I watch it set over the mountains and over the city.
That's
not very nice, but it's not it.
That's not it. That's not it. Because the thing is, I think that true awe is terrifying, and I don't think it allows for the individual to.
It's not aesthetic alone.
No, well, it's not that, but it's also, it doesn't allow, if you have the individual making a choice to try to experience all, then I think you're most likely not going to get it. Now, I mean, one of the ways this can be done is through the ingestion of certain substances, which will oftentimes inspire a religious or all filled experience. But, you know, again, and that so to bring it into the movie a little bit, that psychedelic aspect of this movie, because it is there, and it's the negative side of the psychedelic experience. And you'll remember that it's even blamed on bad grass, as one of the guys says, you know, because drug use was, especially by 1971, widespread in the United States Army in Vietnam, and not just marijuana, but also a lot of heavier stuff. And then for some reason, and I get why they do it, because it also adds another, well, could it be this part to the film, which is to say, well, this chemical was used that was BZ, I think.
Well, he called it something different. BZ is the I think
that's
at the
real.
end of the movie. Yeah, that's real, but that's not what the movie has.
Before the United States Army sues me, BZ, that claim at the end of the movie was not proven, that BZ was actually used on troops. But all I'm saying is that BZ is a real chemical that was developed in a Swiss lab, I believe. Probably, I think, one of the same labs that a lot of the other psychedelics were developed in. Though BZ isn't a psychedelic, I don't think. Yeah, they were. Now, there is some speculation that BZ actually was used I think it was the Beslan school massacre in Russia, where they tried to, there was hostages taken in this school. I don't remember what it was in Chechnya or near Chechnya or somewhere like that. Islamic radical terrorists took over a school. There was a big siege, and then the Russian armed forces went in, and there was some speculation that they used BZ to try to incapacitate the people before they went in.
Would that make sense, though?
Well, so the idea was, and the idea within the movie, and the idea, so okay, very briefly, I wanted to say, there is a history of the United States government using psychedelic drugs in experimentation on both the armed forces and, unfortunately, also civilians. And the MK Ultra program is the biggest example of this. I did not put any of this in the notes, so and I believe the author of this film even referenced a book that's fairly famous called Acid Dreams, which I think was written in the mid-'80s. And it details some of the stuff that came out of the MK Ultra program, which was a CIA-led program that used psychedelic drugs within the context of the Cold War to see how you could manipulate people's minds in order to get information from them, and a variety of other things. It's a very disturbing chapter that a lot of people don't know about. And a lot of this stuff bordered on conspiracy theory, but a lot of these documents were released. I believe it was the church hearings in '75. I think that's when it first came out. A lot of this stuff in the MK Ultra program, and then the CIA director at the time, Richard Helms, actually, this is crazy. He destroyed a bunch of the files from the MK Ultra program and just would not allow it to be seen. Wow. The stuff has come out over time from this, but the most famous example of this is that in San Francisco, there were people using, what they would do is they would use prostitutes to bring in people, and then they would have the prostitute drug the what do you call it? Prostitute user. The John. Yeah, I don't like that name though. I think it sounds weird and old. I don't like it. It is weird. Whatever. Client. The client, whatever you like. They would drug that person with LSD and then watch them and study their behavior. Oh. And so there is, if people don't understand.
Oh, this is tied to the Manson stuff.
Yeah, and I don't know much about that. I know there was a book out recently.
That was it's the book with that guy that he was a journalist. He wrote the book for like 20, 30 years he was working on. He went on Rogan about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an expert. The guy is, so go see the episode where he talks about it. But essentially, I think Manson and that period of experimentation overlap, because Manson was released with when he really shouldn't have been, and the idea was that he could be used to get into these hippie circles where there could be more experimentation done, and that got out of hand.
There's a lot of squirrely stuff with all this, and this isn't the time or place to go into it, but we need to talk about it a little bit, because
we have a lot of other stuff too.
Because the BZ thing is used as an idea of was the government experimenting on its own troops? And I mean, you have this whole storyline there, right? That's separate from the storyline of, oh, this is a person who's dying and having a Buddhist experience. Yeah. Or, oh, this is a Christian story about a guy who's trapped between heaven and hell. And then you have this, and really kind of tacked onto the end of it is,
the conspiracy aspect.
I was hired by the army to create this chemical that was doing anything. All I'm trying to say is there really is a history of the military. Now, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, people can check me on this, it was either King Kesey or one of those guys in the 60s who had their first experience with psychedelic drugs as a person in the army. Because I know for sure, I mean, you can see the footage of this. They have this. The army used their troops, and I don't know if it was voluntary or whatever, but they gave them LSD for sure. Wild. Absolutely, for sure. You can check that out. I think it was King Kesey was the guy that was in the army and done it the first time. I'm not sure, but
no way.
So there's this whole thing, and then so set aside now the psychedelic aspect of it, because you see this notion. Well, don't set it aside yet. You see this idea of flashbacks and of psychotic breaks as possibly being a result of exposure to psychedelic drugs, which I think has been a little bit discounted in the last decade or so with research of that. But that was a common idea of the flashback, and the Vietnam veteran having a flashback. I think that experience of the Vietnam veterans with flashbacks has been linked a little bit more to post-traumatic stress disorder as opposed to drug use necessarily. But that's a very common idea, especially in the 80s and 90s, used to scare people that psychedelic drugs will essentially make you go insane, and that kind of thing. So that's there's that element. And then one more element is Agent Orange, because Agent Orange was a chemical that was sprayed over Vietnam, a defoliation chemical, which is toxic. And there's a lot to that. I wouldn't go into the specifics. I can't speak to that. So that distrust and paranoia, which is talked about in the movie and shown in the movie, you see, and this is true, a lot of veterans rights groups and stuff like that have talked about Agent Orange being exposed to it as causing a lot of health problems and neurological problems, all this kind of stuff. And then the government of Vietnam itself has said people have been sickened, people have been harmed by this chemical that was used to.
I mean, don't they have wards in Vietnam still of people like? Because in my understanding, I believe it was Agent Orange that actually accumulates in the body and can even be passed to children. That it can mutate the DNA so that when you have a child, it can even pass on that damage to the child. Because, or maybe it was just that there was pregnant women that got exposed to it. But I believe they had for a while, like generation after the war at least, they had these. I don't know what the proper term is for them, but like wards, asylums for children that were born with these horrific deformations and issues. And it was attributed to that.
There's a lot here. So I don't know the specifics of that, but one of the inspirations for the horrific special effects in this movie was thalidomide. Which is that drug that was used and that caused deformities in pregnant children, or pregnant, not pregnant. That
is a deformity.
In the children of pregnant mothers, and I mean that's that. You want to talk about horror? I mean, now that's separate from Agent Orange, which is under dispute to some degree. I mean, I think the military has always and may still they don't want to
Well,
definitively
yeah.
say that they take responsibility for that. I don't know. This is very complicated. A lot of people know, I'm sure, the studies more. Agent Orange was used in Malaysia from the British during the Malaysian War right before Vietnam, and then it was used in Vietnam, and that's and you know this history I read of Vietnam recently said, well, the evidence is still not entirely clear whether or not it's caused long-term problems but again, I'm no chemist, I'm no scientist, but these are all things that are playing into this movie that if you know about, then we'll, you can watch the movie and be like, oh, I see that, I get that.
It adds a lot to the movie when you understand these different aspects that go into it. Because actually, I didn't really put that together in that hospital ward horror scene. That all these people with all these deformities. I just thought, oh, that's your typical horror scene, from the medical version. But that makes sense that there are these like, woo, that scene is rough, man. There's something interesting about how much horror can take place in this medical framework. There's something very unsettling, apparently universally unsettling about medicine. And you know what I thought? This is an interesting thing. I think part of what makes a movie when they use hospitals and like the medical field as a scene of horror is that it exposes the trust we have in those institutions and and how vulnerable that trust can make us, because there is that kind of recurring theme in horror a lot, the idea, the lobotomy, the false imprisonment, the idea that because the medical institution is trusted as this expert, neutral force, that if your family comes in and they say, oh, we're so sorry, he no longer has the ability to speak or move, it's just something went wrong with the surgery and it's, we're so sorry, that for the most part, people might push back a little more now because I think there's even more distrust, but there's that element of like, how do you tell them they're wrong? How do you get out of that? And because you're vulnerable in that situation, when you're, especially like this scene of he's on the stretcher, he can't walk, he's being taken to some random basement hospital somewhere, you're at the mercy of this institution, and now the institution is corrupt. So it's a great kind of almost, I would call it this institutional horror, where it's not a person or a monster, it's the institution that has become demonic, and now you're at the mercy of that institution. When he's in the hospital bed and his family comes in and the nurse is like, oh, he might not be able to talk too much because he just got out of the treatment, so whatever. I was like, oh my God, they've given him a lobotomy or something and he's gonna be stuck there or whatever. And then that's not what happened. And it was interesting because I thought then in that moment, I was like, oh wow, it's like so natural to distrust that vulnerability that you have in the institution when the institution seems corrupt.
This is great. That's a great point, because it's bringing something together that I think now we can maybe say something about, which is why the angel is a chiropractor. Because despite my own naysaying about chiropractic, potentially, I'd never been, so maybe it's great. It is considered kind of an alternative, especially I would guess in 1990, considered very much like kind of an alternative medicine, away from the institutions of science and medicine. And so, you see this, that juxtaposition between the doctors and the institutional medicine with the chiropractor who's actually trying to help. And I think we're going
in too. And to the hospital, he's like, this is barbaric. And he like frees him from the institution. Yeah,
I think we're going to see this because we're going to cover several Vietnam movies, and some of them will be, well, they're all horror in their own way. But I think we should be on the lookout for this theme of, because I know that it's there. And the wider point that I think we talked about in Rambo is that I believe that the Vietnam War was a breaking point for the country. It was the time where both left and right had, for different reasons, started to seriously doubt, lost faith in the intentions and validity of the government.
Yeah.
And with the military as an institution for a decade or two. But so we'll see that play out in a lot of these films.
Yeah, this movie does have a lot of besides everything else that it has in terms of, the religious and the spiritual and all of that, there is the institution. And of course, a movie that's going to have war as the vehicle for its story is going to make a commentary on the institution versus the individual. And so we talked about Agent Orange, and the thing about the war that I thought was interesting when I watched this movie is that there's this stark contrast between the institution, the machine of war that needs people as fodder, and then the single person whose story you follow throughout the movie. So even something like a war, battle, you have to sacrifice so many people for a greater goal. And that is in a way not inherently wrong. There are battles that are worth fighting in some way, in some regards throughout history that have been worth fighting or that were unavoidable. There are goals that are worth putting aside one's individual desires to reach a greater goal. But this movie definitely makes a commentary on what that goal is and if it's a worthy goal. And you have the elements of society kind of disintegrating, the grimy subway, the city that seems like Gotham-like. I mean, a lot of the stuff reminded me of Joker, especially the scene with the social worker where the social worker is just super irate with him. And this is a veteran too, which is this kind of idea that no one cares if you're a veteran anymore. There's the mission wasn't supported, so you go back home and there's not this hero's welcome. He's like, I'm in the veterans program. And she's like, oh, well, I haven't had my lunch, which is just like, what are you saying? That sounds so apathetic and trivial and disdainful. And so there's that idea that the social supports fail the individual once they come home from offering their sacrifice for this larger goal. And then there's also the scene where he gets out of the car that people were trying to kill him in, and he's like on the cement, he can't move, he's broken up, and there's this charity Santa saying, like, donate, and then the Santa comes over to him, and you think at first, I'm like, oh my god, the Santa's gonna be a demon. But then the Santa just like pats him down and starts robbing him, like just kind of being like, ho, 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 and looking for his wallet while the guy is incapacitated. And there's actually a relief in that scene, which is a weird thing. I remember watching that part and being like, oh, okay, good. He's just robbing him. He's not actually a demon. Whew. And which is such an interesting distinction to see, that even something like the disintegration of a society and, general apathy are like a welcome relief to something as dark as government conspiracy and being pursued by demons.
So a couple of things about that. I think we'll see this in more films as we go along. If this film was supposed to be set in New York, mid-70s, I mean, from my understanding, my limited understanding, New York in the 1970s was a pretty grim place. Yeah. And so that's portrayed here. And the Joker, of course, used a fictional, essentially, New York as the setting. Gotham is more or less New York.
It's interesting how there's this almost an archetypal dystopian city, and New York has become that. It's kind of
in the 70s. It wasn't. See, so like it was in the 70s,
and
I
the
think
80s.
80s to some degree.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't. And now we're starting to see ideas of it being that way again, right or wrong. I don't know. I'm not making any claims to whether or not it really was that way because I wasn't alive. And I've only been in New York a few times.
There's no it's not a thing to debate. Like
right.
crime during the 80s. I don't know how far it went back. I know it was during the 80s. It was like people were
60s
just
and 70s, I think even. I mean, 60s and 70s, 80s, New York was not.
Yeah, it was like an unlivable place. I remember that there was like accounts of people would leave the city for reasons of safety because it was getting so bad. It was such a violent city. So, I mean, there's, it's not fictional, the usage of that, but it is interesting to consider New York, at least in that time, as this like archetypal dystopia. And it's so funny how it keeps popping up in movies, even though it's not named, it's not like here is New York. It doesn't need to be. We still look and we're like, that's New York.
It is named in Jacob's Ladder. I mean,
is it?
Well, I don't think it's a name, but it is. Like, I would assume that Bergen Street is a real street in New York. I don't know. I mean, that's where he's at the subway.
On the subway, too, and it looks like New York. Like.
Yeah, I mean, it is New York, and I think that it is, well, now if I'm wrong, I would be really foolish. But, I mean, there is no other, it is. And I think that, do they mention it? I don't know. But it is. You know what's really weird, though, is this, and I'm older than you, clearly. But it's funny because, so the movie comes out in 1990. And now from the year 2021, I'm looking back at this movie, and I didn't see it when it came out. I'm not that old, but I saw it, around that time I was alive. So I don't know when I saw it actually. Early 90s, I would assume. The thing that's funny to me is watching it now, even in that small amount of time, it was unclear to me if it was supposed to be set in the mid 70s or the 90s. And normally you can look at cars and make a distinction. And I think it was supposed to be done in the mid 70s. So that means in 1990 they were making a retro film about the 70s.
Huh.
But even in the space of however long ago it was I watched it, I actually can't figure that out immediately upon seeing it. Do you see how weird that is?
Yeah, that there's not enough of that there's not enough of a cultural change or an environmental change to be able to perceive that just from looking at it?
It's really more about it's really more that I can't figure out if if that's what cars look like in 1990 or not. Like I can't quite remember because, I was small.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be set in the 70s. Anyway.
Yeah, it is, but
I didn't know that. Like as I was watching it, I wasn't sure what they were. I thought with the griminess of it and stuff, it probably was the 70s, and it made more sense. But
yeah.
But I wasn't really sure because 1990 is kind of the 80s still. I feel like. Yeah,
it is. And then the late 90s are also the early 2000s culturally in some ways, at least like artistically for sure. It's sometimes decades, bleed into each other, and they'd obviously, if you can't expect a decade has a perfect change at the end and the beginning, and each decade is distinct.
Sure.
Like they kind of bleed into each other sometimes.
What is very 90s we have to talk about very briefly is the special effects. And now, one thing about this movie I liked is that they didn't use CGI at all. The special effects were done in camera, but a very 90s metal thing is the special effect that they use where they like the person's head is like running around, that's
it's so scary.
It is scary, but to me, it is scary and it's good, but it definitely looks like a mid to late 90s metal video to some degree.
See,
it's
I
scarier.
didn't actually think of that, but that's probably the age difference.
It is,
is that you're more conscious at that time of that, and I wasn't. But when you mentioned it, I realized, I was like, oh, that's right, I've seen that. But man, the thing I will give this movie for being a 90s movie, because you can do horror and it can be really, really, really bad and end up really dated very quickly. But limitations can be a real blessing to creativity when they're not, I guess, resented in a way. Because this movie, doing that, where they just it reminded me of Hereditary, the way that the possessed person moves unnaturally for a human being, and because in Hereditary, Annie does the same thing at certain scenes where she's like banging her head on the wall very quickly. That's like impossibly quickly for a human being. And there's different scenes in Jacob's Ladder where the demons are just like moving crazy. Like that's all they're doing. They're just like they're just moving their heads like super fast in all these directions. And it's like everything else is still, but the head is like, and what is that? Why is it so scary? But it is so scary. And that's always the really interesting aspect of horror to me is what about this is scary?
Well, I think
why is that scary?
Because it's body. That's body horror. It's a thing.
Because it's impossible. It's unnatural. It's unnatural. It's supernatural. So you would see that as a human being. You could be any human being. It doesn't matter what time you live in. You would see someone do that and you say, that's not a human. That something is wrong with that human. Deeply wrong with that human. Doesn't matter. You don't even need to be able to read or write to look at someone doing that and say, I gotta get out of here. That person is not a human anymore. And animals do that too. But
it's also and you see it in this film itself. There is an insane person who's just banging their head in a normal way, against a window in the, kind of the asylum scene. You know, and so what it does is there's different aspects to this. So you're correct. In one way, it is an indication that there's a demonic possession or something is possessing this person.
A non-human, entity.
Making them harm themselves, which is just disturbing in and of itself. But then there's also that, you know, people really do that who have mental illness, hit their head on things and stuff like that. And so it's calling up something we know that is a real thing. I mean, all this is scary because asylums are real places. The reason it's scary is because I don't know, but I mean, I doubt in 70s New York things were that terrible in the asylum system. But it looked a lot more. Yeah, it looked a lot more. But we do know horror stories and true horror of when those asylum systems began in the 1800s.
Yeah.
You know, of how terrible.
I mean, it's such
those
a
things
complicated
were.
thing. Because, I mean, on the one hand, when you have the asylums that start in the 1800s and they go on until the mid-1900s, till the deinstitutionalization movement starts, because people say, oh, this is very cruel. I mean, there are accounts of just absolute abuse, you know? And that's a problem you have when you have any vulnerable population like that, is that there are going to be people that exploit that. And there are cases of patients being allowed to starve to death. It's horrible shit. But those institutions were created to better the conditions that people had before them when they were mentally insane, like unable to be on their own and impossibly committed crimes, but in an insane way. I don't know all the proper terminology. But
criminally
they were just in prison. Yeah, criminally insane. They were just in prison. They were imprisoned with actual criminals, and they were treated even worse because there was an understanding that, well, they're insane, so they can't feel cold, so they don't need heat, so they wouldn't have clothing, they wouldn't have heating, they wouldn't have bedding. So the institutions were an upgrade, but again, you know, it's like they were still so cruel in so many ways, and I think that also plays to that scary idea of being institutionalized when you're not actually crazy. That's a theme in horror a lot, which is a weird, again, that goes to the institutional horror, that something can entrap you like that. And I guess in a way that's kind of like a play on hell, you know, because that's what hell is. It's a place you can't escape, that you don't want to be in, that's bad, full of bad things. And of course, if you're in hell, for the most part, you're probably going to say, I don't want to be here, I want to get out, I shouldn't be here. And but
well, I'll hand it to the Buddhists on that. They at least let you get out. So the Buddhists are like, yeah, you go to hell sometimes if you've been bad or whatever, but you can actually get out. There is no permanence of the state. I'm really speculating on Buddhism a lot. A lot of angry Buddhists and angry chiropractors. Feel free to send your comments in and tell me how wrong I am. But yeah, so you, I think, in some, at least of the Buddhist traditions, the idea is that you could descend to hell, but then you could also get out of that and go back to the earthly realm and then eventually the heavenly realm. Whereas in Christianity, at least, you know, you don't really go to hell and then get out. that's pretty much that's how it
You're
is.
just there. That's it.
Yeah, but then again,
Yeah,
that goes
which is
back
pretty.
to that. That goes back to that difference in time.
Yeah.
Given a long enough time in an Eastern tradition, if things keep circling around forever and infinite, then you would expect the ability to move up and down the old Buddhist ladder.
Which is such an interesting thing. Like, it is really a function of seeing time in a longer spectrum. And I mean, they are older also. Like, they have been around and been theorizing for longer. So
Well, the Buddhists started in around 500 BC, I think. That's the idea, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Christianity, okay, yeah, they got a few centuries on Christianity.
yeah, but also
But
like
not-
they still there. You got to know that there's like all these precursors to
Sure,
Buddhism.
sure.
It wasn't like it just came out of the sky one day, you know.
And maybe not 500 BC, maybe it's 900 BC, but it's in that there's this notion of something called like the Axial Age or something like that, where so much that we still believe in was started. So you get like the Greek philosophers in the Western world, but then you also get the rise of Buddhism in the Eastern world.
Yeah.
You get the formation of a lot of these religions in this kind of 500-year window, which still are existing. But anyway,
So
we're
cool.
wildly. This has been a very wide-ranging episode today. I didn't actually expect it because
You didn't.
I didn't. I mean, I was the one that suggested the film, but I hadn't watched it recently. And there was a moment when I watched it, and I was like, "Well, this is very '90s. There's some things in it that doesn't really work for me that well." I mean, So okay, I do want to say this, then I'll let you go ahead.
Okay.
In the next part, but '90s is not a good decade for horror. A lot of people think that it's not, and I don't. And you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna explore that in this podcast. We're gonna take a look because there certainly are some good '90s horror films for sure. But this was one that always stuck in my mind as something. Some of the images from it stuck in my mind for decades. And it does succeed as a horror film. It does succeed on a lot of different levels. But it's that last scene and that the thing that I always have to struggle with films where they leave things very open to interpretation, and there's this danger of it being a lazy way out of a story, of leaving it too open to interpretation. I think because of the way they did basically tell you what happened at the end of the film, I can be okay. I think it's a success for what it tried to do.
Yeah,
but
I think so too.
Yeah,
I liked it. I would recommend it. I would recommend someone to watch it.
Yeah,
I think it does a good job of telling a really complex, universal story at a time in culture, like the framing of the Vietnam War, that makes it important part of the cultural canon in a way, you know? But here's the thing about that ending is that I knew that you were going to take issue with it. And at first I did too, but then I realized why it annoyed me, because I had spent so much time invested in this individual character, following them along in this movie for like an hour, trying to understand all the problems that they were having, getting invested in their family dynamics. Are they going to make it? What choice are they going to make? What's going to happen in the end? Should they have done that? And then the whole movie ends with the character being nothing but a casualty in war. This entire complex individual full of fears, love, pain, and suffering and overcoming is reduced to nothing but a nameless casualty on a medic's table in a war. And that is the ultimate anti-war statement, is that the medics that were working on him didn't even know his name. When they said, oh, he's dead, he died, they walk out and they're like, what's the guy's name? They didn't even know his name. And as the viewer, you just spent all this time getting to know everything about this individual and getting invested in their story, only to have them be killed like a nameless fodder for a war. And that
I actually liked the way
important.
I liked the way that last scene was actually shot. because it had an almost peaceful element to it. Almost when they walk out the door, there was this mildly, maybe it was the routineness of there was a kind of calmness to it, but it also well, and that makes sense because the struggle is over. I mean, because he goes back throughout the film. You see kind of flashbacks of him being stabbed by the bayonet. Yeah. You see in the helicopter and he's dying and all this kind of stuff. But that's a good point about it is an anti-war move, and not only that, but because if I'm correct, and that he never had that family. And he never actually got married and had those 3 kids. That was all essentially really kind of fantasies arising from the mind of a young dead soldier, dying soldier. Then that is even hits harder home because. Yeah, I just got goosebumps. Like it's that's what I think that the ending actually does a good job, is because it makes you understand the loss of war. It makes you feel what it is to lose someone in a war, but more than just someone that matters to you. It really helps you understand the ultimate anti-individual ethos of war, that every person that dies in a war is an individual that had dreams and fears and problems that they've overcome and that they wanted to try to overcome. And every single casualty in a war is just like that full of life that gets reduced to nothing but a number. Especially with the Vietnam War, when they were using, in the other podcast we talked about Rambo, how they would use the body count as a metric for winning the war. Because this is on both sides. It's not only that Americans are individuals, it's also both sides of the war, every single person. That's something that has always really struck me about battle. Even when I watch historic battles, like when I learn about war in like ancient wars and history and all that, I think about how so many people die in battles, and they die young. Their lives are cut short in battle. Of course, the farther you go back, the less likely they were going to live very long anyway. But it always strikes me how costly battle is for the individual, because that's what has to be fed into war, is individuals. And this movie does a great job of reminding people that it's not just whether you lose someone that you care about. It's every single person that gets killed in a war, especially when it's a war that is not necessary or unjust or corrupt, what have you, that these lives, individual lives, are wasted. And so I think it's a great ending. And there is a sense of peace. But it's a weird one. It's a weird sense. It's almost an eerie sense of calm. And it does a good job of almost recreating the sense that if you've ever seen a dead body, that's what it's like. It's that it's just quiet. There's just this stillness. There's no, and that is the end of struggle, which is kind of that, going back to that more Buddhist idea of death not as some kind of loss per se, but as a release, as the end of a struggle, as the ultimate anti-attachment, to even your own life. And so, but even that peace is not the same as peace. There's something very eerie about it. It's just nothing. That's what it is. There's nothingness. That's what I felt when I watched that ending, because they walk out and it's very casual. It's like, oh, what was his name? Okay. All right, whatever. And it's quiet. It's nothing. And I think that is a Buddhist ending. That is a very Buddhist ending. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I found that ending very upsetting in a good way. It really bothered me, but it was good. It was good. But yeah, that's the thing about the whole movie, just to might as well cover the other aspects of how war is a manifestation of anti-individualism. And here's the thing. I think people don't understand when I say war, because what war? No, what war are you worried about going to? No one's going to draft you in the Western world. But it's not that. You can, anytime you have groups that are fighting, that is the reduction of the importance of the individual. And you can see that in something as casual, if you will, as protests and rioting. When people gather in mass for a larger goal, whether or not that goal is valid, it is a lowering of the importance of the individual. Sometimes that is useful. Sometimes it is not. And it's very important to understand that you give something up when you lift up the group. And it can be useful and it can be not useful. It can be destructive. And I think this is a particularly relevant thing when it's so weird. Like, protesting now is becoming such a casual thing. I was looking at something the other day. I was like through some stupid social media videos. And it was like some like child celebrity being like, yeah, I'm going to the protest later. I'll let you guys know where it is. It's like, what is this? What is this? Why of course, because it's become super easy to organize protests. It's just posted on social media and everybody gathers together. It's never been easier to organize groups. And social media is a collectivist medium. That's it, full stop. The way that it works, until they invent something different, right now, social media is has a collectivist culture to it by design. And so I think there's something people don't understand. You don't go into a group and attempt to obtain a group's goal while maintaining your own individuality perfectly intact. You do not. And you can see that anytime a protest gets a little shaky, anytime a large group of people starts to get a little disorganized or a little chaotic, or certain elements of that group start to push it in one way or another, and you can feel that, I don't actually want to go this way with the group. Well, it doesn't fucking matter. You're going unless you get out of there. Like, if you're in a protest and it starts to get rowdy or violent or whatever, or chaotic, that's a bad scene. When your goals no longer align with the group that you've already given up some of your individuality to be in, that's a very it's a jarring sensation. And so, you have that, like, especially when I see some figures advocate things like violent protest or destruction or looting. I think that's the ultimate example of how you can have even something as small, or not a war, just a protest, some type of riot or whatever, and you can see that it is still requires a diminishing of the individual, because no one that cares about you as an individual would tell you to put yourself in a place of danger for a larger goal that is not, something you need, that you have no other option without. It's one thing if it's like, we're going to starve if you don't go and loot the target or whatever. That's different. You've left no option. But you have to measure that. Is it worth me risking myself as an individual for this greater goal? Maybe. Sure. There's plenty of times when that's probably very true. But I think we don't have a very good understanding of what that is anymore. I think people are really disconnected from the cost of entering into a true group, because we've always been in an individualist culture, and now suddenly we're having this influx of collectivist influence and ethos that people are, it's very attractive because it's what we've always done. I mean, human beings have almost always been collectivists. Whether it's in tribes or in larger groups that were ruled by a minority and you were the peasantry, for the most part, human beings have organized themselves in groups, not with a strong bent towards the individual. That's a recent invention. So it's very easy to slip back into collectivism. And I think battle and like kind of this tribalism that's even the tribalism that's coming up through social media and political culture in the country, it is a reduction of your individuality. you have to understand that. That's the cost. That's the cost of group admittance is individuality. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's not a cost worth paying. That's my thing.
I reject it.
Really?
I just reject collectivism. Or
well, come on, you need to say that. You sound like you reject me.
No. Well, I don't feel that. You said something like we all feel good about being in a group or something like that. That's just not.
Well,
the
we're
way
different
I feel.
like that. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. We're very
I like
outliers. That's why we're doing the podcast, because we've always been. I mean, we wouldn't be saying shit like we say on here. You know, Jaws is Jaws is BLM or whatever the fuck that I said. That's gonna get me canceled 50 times a day from now on. You know, you don't. I think we're really underestimating how much social media is stoking collectivism in the culture. Because it was Marshall McLuhan that said, before the internet existed, that there would be an internet and that it would be collectivist. He called it the global village. And if you know what a village is like, it's not a place full of individuals. It is a collectivist group. And any individual that poses a threat to the sustaining of the group is neutralized. I mean, no one cares about what you want. That's the whole thing. I don't know. Hopefully we don't have to learn the hard way that individualism is actually an invention and not the natural state of being. Because, I mean, even that we get to live the way we do, you know, away from society and beholden to our own beliefs and deciding our own lifestyle and all that, that's only because no one else has forced us to obey what they think is the way, you know? You don't get to be as much of an individualist in a country with an authoritarian rule. You conform to what the government decides is the model for people.
Yep, I just don't. I don't even use or humor these ideas. I mean, how should I say?
I don't toy with these ideas.
I don't. I just it's just against my nature to feel sucked into any sort of big movement. I can't even agree with people I like. I can't. You know. That's just. It's just. This is my nature. I'm contrarian, and I'm not. I'm averse to large gatherings, and by large I mean more than like 2-3 people. I remember being a physical manifestation of this, though. I was in Eastern Europe, and there was an Independence Day for the country I was in, and I went onto the street. And the streets were packed so much with human beings that it was packed so much with human beings. And I'm a relatively burly person. I'm not small. And I was there, and there was this moment. There was just this moment. I'll never forget it, the sensation of it. This was probably dangerous, the amount of people. Yeah. They weren't really keeping the crowd control in check. I was just barely... It's hard to explain this. It's almost like the waves of the sea, how you don't know how strong they are until they hit you sometimes. Yeah. And I was packed so tightly, and I felt this tremor move through the crowd that the force of it was the force of like thousands of bodies moving through a crowd and like kind of moving through me. And I felt how you could be smushed in a crowd, like if it went the wrong way. And I like almost panicked for a second. Yeah. And look, I panic about a lot of things, and parties like bother me and all that. But I'm being serious. Like anyone would feel this way, I think. There was this weird feeling, and I kind of noticed it around the crowd itself. It wasn't bad. It wasn't like there was a stampede or anything. But somehow at an intersection, things got kind of pushed together too much. And anyway, it was a very physical manifestation of this feeling of being amongst a herd of people, and I don't like it.
That's a great example to make it a more physical representation of the idea that you lose some individual autonomy when you enter into a group. I mean, that's very literally what it is that when you're embedded enough in a large group like that, you even lose the ability to move very freely. And you get subjected to whatever direction the crowd starts moving. It's a really, it's scary and panic-inducing because you suddenly realize you aren't entirely free. And I'm talking about exactly your example. I'm not talking about some philosophical thing. I'm talking about what it feels like to be kind of smushed in a crowd and to know that you can't just leave. Because even in that situation, you have to kind of shuffle out, and it's like, it's not just like, okay, I'm just getting out of here. You can't just run and push everybody out of the way because then you're in another problem. Then the crowd turns on you. It's like, what's this guy that's causing all this problem? And that becomes a new thing. And you can't trample people either because as you start running, all of a sudden you panic one person, then they start running. They think something's wrong. Then you create a stampede and people actually get trampled. I mean, it's
yeah, I mean, that's true. But this was a situation. I wonder how dangerous it was, really, because you say, you can't run.
I mean, think about Black Friday. People get trampled just trying to get into a store.
That's what I was going to say, though. This was different. There was no way to run. There was physically no way for me to put a foot in front to even begin to walk. That's what I'm saying. It was a very bizarre. I was kind of like almost. How did you get out? No one was panicking, and no one panicked. There was no reason for panic. It was, that's what I'm trying to say. It was like this weird wave of an ocean or something that through a packed crowd weird. Where these streets were intersecting. And then you could see it around you that people noticed this wasn't great, but nobody freaked out or anything. And slowly, as I approached the intersection or something, I don't know the exact geography of it. It kind of released, like people get a little bit more room. I assume as people were able to maybe make a choice between which way they were going to go up at this intersection. I don't know why it happened that way, but this is something that happened 15 years ago, and I can physically remember it because weird. It's a weird feeling to feel a force greater than your own acting on your body, and luckily not harming you, but. I mean, it was.
Well, it reminds me of also another collectivist element in war is that when war is organized, the whole premise behind a lot of the training is just to get people to give up their individuality and to move cohesively as a group. And that's also a sense of some of the pleasure that soldiers get from war, like that marching, the whole marching perfectly in unison, perfectly coordinated with a large group of people. I've heard that described as kind of almost having its own awe-inspiring feeling to it, because suddenly the individual, and this is the beauty of collectivism, there is it's not just one is good and one is bad or whatever, but there's that sense that
it is. I'm against it.
I mean, what else to say about this. I'm not a fan. I know, like, I get it. I get it that there's also things that collectivism can do well. I just let y'all do it over there. Go do the collectivist things over there.
It's the worst thing in the world. I'll just make claims all night and day. I don't care. Here's the thing. Like, if you watch those like synchronized dancing from North Korea and stuff like that, if weird. You look at that and like, it's dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing. It's weird. It's okay. It's like, it's a fascinating.
It's on purpose.
So I understand that, and I'm against it.
Because it's like, it's not about the individual human. It's about how the human is a part of a whole, which is, of course, like, look, I don't like that at all. I find that very unnerving because it means you're dispensable. If it's not your individual traits that make you important to whatever you're performing in, then you can be replaced by any other body that functions in the same ways yours does.
But I'm against it for a different reason, which is that there's usually only so much. I'm against it for that reason also, but there's only so much harm that one person can usually do. And granted, they can do a lot of harm. But if you think about it, it's when people get into groups and bands and larger groups, then they can really cause a lot of harm. So I'm against it on this kind of overall level of, there's only, most individuals are relatively harmless, even if they're ill-intentioned or bad or whatever. But you take a group, and the group can be perfectly convinced of its righteousness, and the group could even be correct in some ways about being right. There's still now the potential for terror and violence now has just exponentially risen when you put a bunch of people in a group that are supposed to do the exact same thing. And remember, the group's always taking orders. This isn't a group that's like a swarm of birds. Do you see the birds in the air doing the synchronized dancing or whatever? That's fine. I'm fine for birds doing synchronized dancing in the air. That's beautiful, actually, if you've seen that, where they're able to make these very strange patterns because of how they're able to interact. What that actually is, though, is that it's each bird interacting with just its closest neighbor, and the way that then plays out over the course of the entire flock of birds looks like it's intentional or looks like it's a pattern. But all right, I don't know. At this point, I'm just talking about fucking birds dancing in the sky. So, and we're talking about Jacob's Ladder. I don't know, where are we at here?
Yeah, but it's still good. Don't cut yourself off. I mean, yeah, whatever. Okay, so the ills and the benefits of collectivism. I don't like it, man. Like, I don't like it either, because here's the thing. Anytime as I got older, I realized I was like, I don't even want to be in a crowded building, because if there's a fire or if someone comes in here with ill intent, you're just in a stampede. And no one cares. Like, they will trample you to get out of there. They don't care if you're a grandma, if you're a child. At the end of the day, like, there's two forms of groups. There's the one you're talking about that is organized. That's very scary. That's what war is. That's groups like that didn't always exist. It's really interesting to study warfare historically, because then you understand how it's a technology to be able to organize human beings in a way that maximizes their lethality, because it's different if you just have 10 people that are all running in one direction towards a target than if you have 10 people that have come up with a particular strategy for to go first, followed by one over here, then you go over here behind. Like, you can do way more damage when you actually organize the group too. So it's which the world history has shown very well. So yeah, groups, not great. Be very careful with groups. Now, to sum up, we're pretty much done here, but I just want to kind of go back to a few little parts in here that are important, I think, to understand. Because with Jacob in the movie, so he's supposed to be dying. He's in that in-between place, life and death. But what's interesting, I thought, is that, so here he is being plagued by these demons, and he's dying. He's not on earth, and he's not on heaven, but even as he's being pursued by demons and fighting for his life, he's still in earth. So in a way, this purgatory isn't actually a place of fire and brimstone and monsters and all that. It's just your life being pursued by these like demons, and like every time you think that you're going somewhere, you end up somewhere else, and every time that you think you've figured it out, you fall farther. And in a way, it's this really great representation that hell is not some other realm. It is your life on earth going wrong in all the possible ways it can go wrong.
How would you get your Christian theology right, though? Because purgatory and hell are different things.
I know.
Why do you call him is purgatory supposed to have flames and stuff?
Well, because he's not in hell.
No, but that's because you're all Christian about this, and I'm Buddhist style. This is the bardo. This is the intermediate area, which is similar to purgatory, right?
Yeah.
That Buddhists believe you are in when you are, either dead or yeah.
Yeah, well, whatever, however you want to call it. But, the idea is
you're doing misinformation about purgatory. And I think the Catholic audience is against it. I don't actually know what purgatory is. Purgatory kind of shitty? Is it kind of hot? What's going on?
I don't think it's good. It's not
don't
pleasant.
You know? Weren't your mom Catholic or something?
No, I mean, yeah, but I don't remember purgatory.
I'm Protestant. Yeah. I mean, I was, or whatever, however you want to say. But
I don't have a division.
Cubanish, so you're supposed to be Catholic stuff, right?
Well,
they're in a purgatory, no?
I think so. I mean, my mom we would go to Catholic church, but then we started going to increasingly intensely Christian churches that, they get a little more wild. So I don't know. I don't know what all their stances on purgatory are. But whatever.
I don't think purgatory is even real. It's not even in the Bible. I think they just made it up.
It was
Catholics.
Dante.
No, I don't doubt he made it up.
He has the idea too, and he was what? Catholic.
Yeah, but he got it of course he was Catholic. Everybody was Catholic.
There you go. He's talking about it. He didn't get put to death for the idea, so I guess they were.
No, but I'm saying the Catholic Church I don't think purgatory is in the Bible. That's what I'm trying to say. But that might just be my Protestant upbringing.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's an interesting thing.
It's a lot of speculation.
A lot. But yeah, so whatever. The point is that I think that was an interesting element, is that he was still living his everyday life, even though he was dying and being pursued by these demons. So it's a cool way to think about something like another realm, because you would think about it as being like, oh, it's supposed to be this other world, whatever it is, whether it's purgatory or hell or something beyond that. You would think it looks different, but it was just his normal world, his everyday world, except everything was slightly wrong. His family, or whatever the family that he would have had, was gone. Things that he expected to go certain ways would not. Things that would have been normal otherwise, like a demon would pop up. And it's just like everything would take a wrong turn for horror. And I think that's a better way to understand hell, as not some kind of, mystical place, but really as something that can be embedded into your own life. And one other thing, real quick. One of the scariest parts in the movie, I think, is when his ex-wife is visiting him in the hospital. That scene where he's just got out of the crazy...
It's not ex-wife. She still is a wife. He's just separated. He's just separated.
Oh, they were...
from her.
Okay.
Yeah. As a Catholic, you're not allowed to get divorced. I don't know if that's true.
Okay.
I'm just going to say a bunch of random things that are not real about Catholicism. Okay, well, I think they're against divorce, but anyway.
I think they are, yeah, but I don't know if they, like... Okay, whatever, irrelevant. So
it's
anyway,
not irrelevant. The guy's wearing a cross on his chest most of the time, I think. The guy. Really? Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't know. He's a Catholic or whatever. But anyway, the point is they're not.
Stop derailing.
Here's the thing. Once the podcast reaches a certain level of minutes, I start to get more and more like there's this where I start to get rowdy and my blood sugar is low.
Yeah, I just stuck my hand in the candle, so I'm also getting a little. I just want to say,
sign when you're doing a podcast, you just put your hand in the candle to feel the pain.
Just making sure I'm here and not in the bardo. Anyway, there's one part that I like in the movie where he's getting visited by his separated wife, and she's like, I still love you, blah, 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 all these nice things. And he's just kind of looking at her with love and feeling like this is going to be good. And then suddenly, no camera change, nothing. You just hear, dream on. It's the worst part of the movie. It scares me so much.
Yeah.
And then he just goes, oh. And the ex-wife is like, or the wife, what is going on? And it's such a weird thing. It's that weird place where you thought it was real, you thought you were okay, but it's not. You're still in the nightmare. And it reminds me of when you have a bad dream and you think that you're waking up, but then you realize you're not, or that kind of weird, or when you do wake up and you're not entirely sure if you're actually waking up or if that happened or not. And there's kind of that moment where you think, that's over. Okay, that's over. And it's that weird in-between place between being able to rely on your material reality and then the unknown, not being able to know if it's what you're experiencing is actually what you're experiencing. There's something very disturbing about that.
Yeah, because it's also, I think, a sign of psychosis is when you can't determine
right.
reality, and you know, and again playing under the solace that, you know, he one of the scariest ones for me was not that, though that was good too, but the one I didn't like is well, I liked it in the sense it was good horror, is that he's sitting there and Jezebel's like making food or something, he's reading and trying to like, he's kind of like off in his own world, you know, and she gets in his face and is like, "Are you even there?" You know, and her eyes turn black for a second. Yeah. That one bothered me because that
was a good one.
Yeah, that was a good one. And the one where he's, I mean, again, now we're just talking about, I mean, it's an effective film. Horror fans should, if you haven't watched it, check it out. There is a remake. Please avoid that. It looks like garbage.
It looks bad.
Not rated hard. I've never bothered watching it. This is Jacob's Ladder, 1990, with, what's the guy's name? The main actor?
Tim Robbins.
Who we were like, oh, what's that old boy do? And he married Susan Sarandon, I believe.
What? Really?
I think that isn't that Susan Sarandon's husband?
I don't know.
I'll do misinformation about Catholicism.
Now we're in a bad tabloid.
Tim Robbins.
Well, I know that he's been in Shawshank Redemption. That's probably the only other thing I've seen him in.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, they were certainly in a... they didn't get married, I guess, or something, but they were a couple for many years, and I guess now aren't or something. It's unfortunate, I guess. I don't know. Oh. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I like that scene too because, again, this is like, there's a way to do horror with the limited ability to do CGI and all this stuff that almost is better because it comes off a little more scary in its limitations, because you can't get too crazy. You have to be a little more closer to reality without getting so far into trying to do something unreal that it just seems unreal. And that part is so scary. It's just so creepy because I think they, like, her teeth look weird and the pupils of the eyes are huge and it's just like right in his face. So that part and the people with the shaking heads, it's a lot of good horror scenes. I mean, because horror is really just creativity. It's really trying to see because I mean, some horror works and some doesn't. It's not that you can just, show a dead body and it's like, wow, this is horrific. It's just not that simple. There is an artistic creativity to it. So I think this movie does a really good job. And her character is an interesting one because it's like she's on the border of supposed to be, a partner, but also she's kind of a demon too, because Jezebel is the false prophet in the Bible. And Jezebel has the true prophets executed and changes the worship of God to the worship of pagan gods. And she gets executed later in the Bible. They throw her out of a window and she gets eaten by dogs. So not a great way to go. Don't be a false prophet is a thing. And she destroys his family photos, which is interesting. The second time I watched the movie with, a little bit of a closer eye towards her character, I realized she also can't say the name of the boys, the ones that drop off the pictures. And remember, he says,
but she has two other sons, right?
I couldn't figure out if they're the sons or not.
It seemed like he said cousins or something at one point. It was weird. It is weird.
It's not the sons because the sons are named something different, I think. But yeah, they're something. Whatever. I don't remember the relation of the boys that drop it off, but I don't think it's his actual sons. But either way, he says, "Why can't you ever get their names right?" And she's like, "I don't have it. I don't like church names." And it's because the name is Eli, and I forget what the other one's name. I think Ezekiel or something. I don't know. And so, of course, she is a false prophet and a demon, so she doesn't say their names. So that was interesting.
So that's the Christian interpretation. Then you throw it to the Buddhist interpretation, which they say in the film also, that the people you think are demons are actually angels if you let go. Well, by burning the family photos, she's releasing him of the attachments to this world of, attachment, or whatever the Buddhists would call it. So you can look at it in different ways. but I
Yeah.
look at it in the Western way because I'm not a Buddhist, and I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, don't take my stuff and burn it.
Or
Fuck you
individualist like approach. Yeah, I think both ways to look at it actually adds something to the way you can interpret it, you know? So it's not even that it has to be one or the other. I think they're both enlightening to look at. And ultimately, that's, I think, what is the sum of this movie in a way is that there is, because Jacob's Ladder is in a way the pursuit of an enlightenment. And that's also the goal of Buddhism, is the pursuit of enlightenment, of a higher level of being. And whether it's through the letting go of attachments or whether it's through the assertion of the individual as opposed to, you know, being fodder for a collectivist group towards bad ends, the goal is to reach a higher plane, to ascend that ladder. So I think that's a good way to analyze the movie, is that struggle. Ultimately, you're hoping to go higher up in life. And there is one way to look at the interpretation of Jacob's Ladder as just the moving back and forth between virtue and sin. You know, every time you act in the name of virtue, you ascend higher, and every time you act in the name of sin, however you define sin, doesn't have to be per the 10 Commandments, though we've given you that, you descend on that ladder away from a higher being.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jacob's watching these angels or whatever rocking up and down the ladder. They're going both ways, you know? Am I right?
Yes, that's right. He was watching them rock up and down the ladder.
It wasn't like they were all just going up there straight out.
Yeah.
You know?
No.
Also, why is Jacob, you know, bad idea here. He takes a rock, puts it underneath his head for a pillow. Is that how...
The Philosopher's Stone.
No.
No. I found some really weird stuff when I was doing
bet.
research. I found some stuff about, like, there's phosphorus is the key to human life. And in the Odyssey, they talk about Jupiter, and Jupiter has phosphorus, and the Jacob's Ladder is actually symbolic of human DNA, and DNA has phosphorus, so everything is about... It sounds like it gets into the whole purity of essence direction.
Is this a chiropractor page? Okay.
I read it for a little bit, and I was just like, ooh, I better stop. Somehow this is going to make me go crazy, because there's some weird theories out there. We're not trying to do that. That's what people don't understand, is that, yeah, maybe this is a semi-secret society, and maybe we talk about mythology and esotericism and all of that weird stuff, but through the lens of a little bit of rationality. Just a little bit pulled down. Just being direct, you know? Nothing fanciful, no crazy conspiracies.
Well, no crazy conspiracies, but I would say it's fanciful at times.
Is it?
I like to think of my attitude as fanciful towards,
You do?
I think that it is. I think that in the past I've already explored the concept of worshiping bears as a possible alternative religion that we could all embrace.
I guess that is pretty fanciful.
I would call that fanciful. And I'm not claiming that it must be done. I'm not establishing myself on the internet as the leader of a bear cult. I'm simply saying.
Well, then you would be the collectivist, so you can't do that.
But as we know, bears are made of phosphorus.
And that's the key.